by Apple Computers.
From Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Michael Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, policing the cops. In the Crossfire, former Hawthorne, California policeman Don Jackson and Dewey Stokes, National President of the Fraternal Order of Police.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. Policeman Don Jackson wanted to show that police brutality against blacks is on the rise. So, he and a friend put on shabby clothes, rented an old car, and got a television camera to follow them as they drove into Long Beach, California. Almost immediately, they were pulled over. Here's what happened when Jackson got out of the car.
Hey, come over here.
For what?
Because I'm f***ing telling you to, that's why.
What are you talking about, man? You want to write a ticket, write a ticket. Don't mess with me, man.
Listen, I got the right to pat you down, and I'm going to f***ing do that.
Yeah?
I don't know if you got a knife or weapon on you.
You can pat me down, but don't mess with
Turn
me,
around
man.
and put your f***ing hands on your head now.
Why?
Do it now, because I'm f***ing telling you to.
What are you going to do?
Put your f***ing hands on your
You
head!
going to hit me with that stick?
Yeah, I just might.
For what?
Put your hands on your head.
For what? Right
I don't know if you got a f***ing knife, you
I don't have a knife.
Put your f***ing hands on your head. Turn around!
Nothing, man, nothing. Nothing, man. I'm all right, okay? No problem.
And here's what happened when a black fraternity frolic in Virginia Beach over Labor Day weekend got out of control. Critics contend that the only difference between these incidents and hundreds of others is that they are on videotape. And the critics aren't just blacks and left-wingers. Supporters of Operation Rescue, a right-to-life group, complained that police routinely inflict pain to break up peaceful sit-ins at abortion clinics. So, are the police just doing their job, or are they getting carried away? Pat?
Officer Don Jackson, tell us what you and your friend were doing in that car driving late at night with that camera in the back.
Well, essentially what we were doing was being black in America and bringing out the truth and the evidence that racism still exists very much in law enforcement, that blacks are not free to travel, that there is apartheid in America, and that the restrictions that white America places on black America is enforced by the police.
All right, Officer Jackson, what I want to ask you is why were we not allowed to see the videotape that went before? Why, when you're stopped by police officers, two black men driving in a car late at night, we don't know what you did to be stopped, we don't know why you're out of that automobile, we don't know why you won't give us the videotape beforehand.
To be honest with you, all the tape was made available. I believe your editors might have left some of it out. But essentially, this incident was one that was precipitated by no criminal acts on my part. We drove down to the area of Long Beach after getting numerous complaints about police violence from not only blacks but whites as well. We got on the highway. We were followed by an NBC news crew. They had videotape following us from behind, as well as a camera mounted.
Have you released all the videotape?
Yes, we have.
You
You haven't sued that cop yet, though, have you, for violating your civil rights?
No, I have not. I filed a claim against the city of Long Beach, and I am going to sue. But
all right, now let me tell you what the argument again, and you've heard it too. It is that you're a cop. And you know what, you mean cops moving through that area being nervous. You know exactly what's going to tick them off, what's going to make them excited. And they pull up, and your car pulls up. All of a sudden, you get out of the car. And these two cops are at night, they're saying, what's going on? And so the cops start using the language to try to get you under control, and you're giving him grief backing up. And so what they're saying also, what they're saying is the next morning, there weren't any cuts on you from that broken glass, but that cop's hand was all cut up.
The reason his hand was cut is because after he shoved me through the window, a shard of glass came down and struck him at the top of his wrist. Back to the issue of what we showed and what was seen on tape. All the tape was released to NBC, or released to the police officers. They contended that there had to be some hidden evidence of some misconduct on my part. And we're in America. It's all right to get out of your car and ask a police officer questions.
But no, you're a cop. Excuse me, Officer Jackson. You're not an average citizen. You're a cop, and you know exactly what will make these guys nervous late at night. Well, why didn't you just sit in the car and say, we'll take the ticket?
I'll tell you why.
And then if a guy did brutality, you got him.
Because if a white man gets out of his car and asks questions, excuse me, sir, let's stand over here to the side, let me talk to you for a minute.
All right, now you know better than that,
No,
too.
I don't know better. If a black man gets out of his car, he's very often subject to precisely this type of violence.
Now, you and I know, look, officer, it's just a simple fact of life. There are as many young black folks between 16 and 30 years old in the penitentiary as there are in college. For any group in America that's arrested and in prison, that's the highest group. Now, if it's an old lady, obviously they're not going to be scared.
I also
These guys are nervous, And you know why? Because you have to deal with the same problem.
I also know that Bull Connors, when he was hosing down and sicking dogs on people, was not attacking gang problems or gang members. I know that there's a history and legacy of racism within law enforcement.
Yeah, but Michael, this is ridiculous. Look at what you're looking at. You're looking at California. You're looking at an area that has gang shootings, drive-by shootings, blacks involved in crime. Here's a police officer that goes out and gets out of the car, breaks every rule that he knows that any officer is concerned for his safety or the safety of the citizens. He violates that by backing up. He wouldn't raise his hand till the officer said, I hit you with a stick. The voice command, raise your voice, take command of the situation. That's exactly what that officer was doing. This officer knew what that officer was doing. He tried his best to coax, to goat that officer into striking him with a stick to precipitate an incident that may have caused. How did he know what they were doing? Two of them in that car. They violated. He didn't violate the law. He was a passenger. They had traffic violations. That's why they stopped him.
Okay, the traffic violations. No, I think you're misinformed on what happened. And if you go to Long Beach court records, you'll find that there was no criminal violation in that case. That I was prosecuted.
But look,
there was no traffic violation, and there's no case that the Long Beach.
Then why did you pick out a junky secondhand used car?
Look, he did it because they were obviously he was testing.
Sure, testing it. But if you're going to test me fairly. Don't test me.
So black people should not drive junky cars.
No.
Your remarks are entirely half-baked.
No, they're not half-baked.
Black people are entirely free to go where they please, when they want to, and dress any type of way that they want to dress.
Right, but they're not entitled to break the law. They're not entitled to break the law.
And what law do we break?
Nobody.
What law do you know of? What law do you know of that was broken?
You was specific.
You don't know of any law that was broken.
I did not violate the law.
Name the law.
You know darn well that the guy driving the car violated a traffic violation.
Oh, he did?
Officer, how did you get the cops to stop you?
I'll tell you. We pulled out onto Pacific Coast Highway in Long Beach, committed no traffic violation. The police officer pulled up alongside of me, looked at me, saw my black, shiny face, and said, here's a nigger that I'm going to jack up.
Let me tell you,
that's exactly what he said. Because when he pulled me over...
Why you had the camera in the car, officer? You were doing something to make sure. Let's get those cops to stop us.
He was trying to prove exactly what he did prove, which is that if you're driving down the street not breaking the law, but you're in a shabby car and you're black, you get pulled over.
This type of treatment is commonplace for black African Americans.
Let me ask you one thing.
Let me ask you. Well, look what you're looking at in Los Angeles and in that area.
Who cares where it is?
Where the drive-by shootings.
Was it in America?
Okay, but
was it in America? Was it in South Africa?
If you violate...
Was it in America or South Africa?
If you live in America, you got a right to come and go as you please, black or white or anybody else.
In America, there are passed laws for blacks, just like in South Africa.
You are living in the 1850s.
No, that's right.
You're not
in America, I certainly am.
Officer Jackson, come on.
One-way ticket.
Come on.
Get a boat.
Hold it.
My family was probably here before yours was, so I'll stay here as long as I want to.
But you ought to live within the structure of the law.
Officer Jackson, look, you are well-dressed, you're 30 years old, you're articulate, you're one of a member, I think, of a black middle class. You got 60% of blacks moving that middle class in the most competitive society on earth, and you're comparing this with South Africa?
Absolutely.
You've got every opportunity.
For heaven's sakes.
You've got every opportunity in the world to
number of
progress.
blacks do not live like I live, do not dress like I dress. Most blacks do occupy
the per capita
that
income
lower...
of blacks in America is the same as Canadians.
But you know what? The police treat us all the same.
No, let me tell you what.
Not.
Yes, they do.
No,
Mr. Jackson, you're right. I mean, I think if I went out, Michael and I are driving along in a car, we're going to get better treatment than if you and your friend are driving along in a car. And the reason for that is not because they dislike you personally.
Oh, you think so?
No, I think it's because, look, in Washington, D.C., 99% of the crimes, 99% of the arrests are black males. Now, these guys know this driving along there.
That has nothing to do with the arbitrary use of violence. And I'll tell you, the racial overtones in law enforcement are overwhelming.
No,
There's significant evidence of racism. That's why Los Angeles Police Department officers have been driving their police cars with South African emblems on them. That's why the L.A. County Sheriff has had to discipline officers for burning crosses in the jail. That's why 88 LAPD officers are under suspension or under investigation for violating the civil rights of over 40 black people during a beating that they conducted.
You raised interesting issues there. There's a lot of folks who are in the right to life movement, the anti-abortion movement, who claim their civil rights are being violated the same way that Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights demonstrators of the 1960s were violated. Is that true? We'll take it up when we come back. Welcome back. 2 decades ago, civil rights demonstrators faced off against white cops in Selma, Alabama. An anti-war leftist confronted Mayor Daley's finest outside the Conrad Hilton Hotel in Chicago. Now the issue is national. From Tompkins Square in New York to Virginia Beach, where black students rioted over Labor Day, to West Hartford, Pittsburgh, and L.A., where Operation Rescue, the anti-abortion militants blocked clinics, the issue returns. Now, are we seeing an epidemic of police brutality or just a rise in citizen complaints in a political game where you score points by trashing the cops? Our guests here are Dewey Stokes, National President of the Fraternal Order of Police. He's from Columbus, Ohio. And Don Jackson, he's a former Hawthorne, California police officer whom you saw on our tape and who got national attention earlier when he went down Long Beach into an area in an old car and was perceived to be the victim of police brutality. Now, Don Jackson, perceived to be, I say. All right, let me ask you this. Is it not valid to say that we talked about who's doing the crime, but clearly the principal victims of crime in America are black citizens in the inner city. Even under the Kerner Commission, it was 35-1 over a suburban area like McLean or Chevy Chase. Isn't it true that most of the black folks in those areas really want more police protection rather than to get the cops out?
Well, the police have placed the black community in a very confused position because, of course, they want more police. Everyone wants more protection. But the people in the community, the inner city, don't know who to call because the police certainly are not their friends. They fear the police often as much as they do the gang members.
Now, look, in Washington, D.C., affirmative action, all that, a significant slice of the police force here in Washington, D.C. is black. And they protect the black community as well as the white community here. Now, if all this were going on, why wouldn't these cops say, all our colleagues are really beating up on our people? We don't hear that.
You're hearing it right now.
No, but you don't.
You're from Hawthorne, California.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're hearing it right now. Black police officers are stepping out against abuse.
4,000 police officers in the District of Columbia. 55% of them are black. We have the murder capital of the world. We have 300 complaints to the Civilian Review Board here a year that cost this city, this district, over $1 million. Complaints against police officers in this country are on the decline. What you see is just what this officer did in Hawthorne, California. Planned tactics to court the cops and to do the same thing that you see.
Please, I want to ask Dewey Stokes a question, if I may. Let's not talk about what Mr. Jackson's did, whether it was right or not. We've talked about that. Let's talk about what the cops did, irrespective of whether they were goaded. Is what we saw on that tape what you would recommend as good police behavior? Did they do anything wrong in your opinion?
No, they tried to get command points. When that officer come up to him, his head hit a glass.
Wait a minute.
A glass.
He grabbed him from the back and shoved him into he shoved his head into the glass. He grabbed
the officer, and the officer's intentions was not to put the man's head through that glass. And that never went through his mind.
Let me express something here.
He grabbed the man.
It may not have gone through his mind, but it went through the glass.
Let me express one thing.
It's the same thing out here when you get into the Hawthorne or you get into the Virginia Beach, where people say, in this day's society, they think, I'm above the law. I don't have to. I don't have to comply to the law. The direction of police.
You missed the point of the sting. It was a sting operation, and it was very much intended to disclose exactly what you saw. Police violence, which was unwarranted and had no reason to happen. Let me say this.
How do you answer?
Let me say this. Let me say this.
Never said a word about it.
Let me say this.
I've seen this with the ACLU and the other liberals.
Let me make a point. After I was shoved through the window, I was taken over to the car, and I had my head bashed into the hood 3 times. The officer attempted to break my finger. That was also on film.
Why wasn't your head cut up the next day?
Because I believe in God and Jesus Christ, and miracles like this can happen. That has nothing to do with it. Whether I show any visible injuries has no bearing on whether or not this officer was out of bounds with regards to proper policy.
How do you answer his point, which is there is a decline in the number of complaints of police brutality?
I can also,
I can tell you,
I'll give you something. consistently African Americans wind up as some 50% of those killed each year by the police. And let me, because you pointed out that let me finish. You said that all these incidents are precipitated by some type of act by the individual. I have a litany of individuals who didn't do anything. Marcus Donnell shot in his driveway in front of his kids because he matched a robbery description, had no gun. Betty Jean Aborn shot 18 times by LA County sheriffs. A Newport Beach man shot walking down the beach with his wife carrying a radio. The police said it looked like a rifle. I mean, I could go on and on. Don't tell me this garbage. I don't buy it.
There's 500,000 police officers in this country, 240 million people. And there's going to be filed a 500,000 police officers. I'm not sitting here, and there's no one else saying that they're perfect and everything that they do is exactly to the T right. That's why we have courts. That's how we have a Civil Rights Act. There's redress. If he had obeyed those police officers that night,
I'm going to have redress.
And if he had obeyed them,
I'm going to have redress.
You wouldn't need redress if you had obeyed them when they got out of the car.
The officer in this situation is being prosecuted for assault and battery, false arrest, and filing a false report. Now, I didn't file the case on him.
Did the officer do anything wrong? You saw the videotape. You're saying he didn't do anything wrong in smashing this guy.
This gentleman here, when he got out of the car, why get out of the car? The procedure is that you stay in the car. They taught you that in the police.
That's right. So they're allowed to beat you for getting out of the car. That's precisely what you're saying. That's precisely what you're saying. If a black man gets out of the car,
all right, you guys, time out. We still haven't got time out, you guys. We still haven't gotten to Operation Rescue, and if we have time, we'll also get to something called pain compliance.
Dewey Stokes, President of the Fraternal Order of Police. I want you to answer me something. West Hartford, Operation Rescue, anti-abortion demonstrators sit in an abortion clinic, okay? Why did the cops take off their badges, take off their ID tags before they used all these tactics on them? Now, the reason I ask that is I know these folks pretty well, and they didn't complain for months and years about anything. But West Hartford, L.A., and Pittsburgh, they say they're using police brutality on girls, women, everybody.
I cannot answer what they did or why they took those badges off.
Why else would they take them off unless they're going to do something they shouldn't be doing?
I don't know what they did up there. I wasn't there, but I can say this to you. Those people went in with the intent of being arrested to create a disturbance, to block the ingress and egress
but they're nonviolent civil. I mean, they're nonviolent civil.
They practice nonviolence. They go there, they lay limp. They want the police to pick them up. They want them to try and move them, drop them, injure them, create a lawsuit, get publicity.
They got one of them in. Well, they're not getting publicity. They got one of them in the police station, a girl, and they grab her by her brassiere and drag her up these stairs. One guy got his arm broken. What's the problem?
That's not professional police work. That's not the way it should be handled. That's why we have the courts. That's why we have a judicial system. That's why we have civil rights violations, to create that redress, to make sure that those officers behave in a professional manner. There's people like this that go around the country that want to goad police into making these mistakes, to create lawsuits, to create problems. But throughout this country, the complaints against the police are down. We've hired more black police officers,
Are the police secret left-wingers? Why are they picking on these poor right-to-lifers?
Well, I think anyone who makes a policeman's job difficult and fights them in any way is likely to run into this kind of abuse. Now, I'm not taking issue with whether the abortion rights people have a right to be out there or not, but what I'm saying is if they're not presenting any force against the police officer, certainly force should not be used against them.
What is this thing, Mr. Stokes, called pain compliance? I keep reading about.
Let me say this.
It's a new technique. I mean, the statistics about police brutality going down, but there is a new technique which they complain about called pain compliance.
You can reach down and get a hold of people at certain pressure points and try to get them up to come under.
I'm a restraint instructor, and these types of holds are used to make. They're called come-alongs. They make people move. But if people don't move, what happens? You've got to keep twisting and applying pressure, and ultimately you're going to break something.
Why is it necessary to do that to a protester who's lying limp? Why can't you just lift them up and carry them out?
Well, then why don't you pass a law that says they can lay there limp and they can lay there in the street and block the ingress and egress of these expenses?
It's only 30 seconds. Officer Jackson, look, I think one reason most people support police strongly is that, look, they say those guys are out there on the line, and there's almost barbarism going on in the society and the drug culture, and they're protecting us. And okay, they make mistakes, And it seems like you seem to be hassling these guys,
No,
even though you're one of
the
them.
police have been writing their own rules. There's a code of silence that Mr. Dewey here does not know about, or obviously doesn't know about.
Well, you're judging the whole country by your inexperience in one area.
That prevents the police from being adequately monitored as other organizations in the government are. And they're writing their own rules.
Quick final word.
There's rules, regulations, policies in each police department. We got the Civil Rights Act. We also have civilian review boards like we have right here in the District of Columbia, and the complaints are down. And fact is, those officers have not been found guilty.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dewey Stokes. Thank you, Don Jackson. Pat Buchanan and I will be back for a final word in a moment. Pat, I'm glad we had a chance tonight to salvage your reputation with the Right to Life community. You know, I don't know if police brutality is increasing or not, but it's always there. And I think it's useful in a way for right-wingers to realize what it is to be victimized by it, as seems to be happening in this Operation Rescue.
It would be useful if you folks were as upset about that as you were upset about the police brutality on the civil rights demonstration. I got a question for you now. And that is, Virginia Beach, 100 stores were looted and pillaged. Is that your idea, what you introduced as a student frolic?
Did you hear what I said? I said a frolic that got out of hand. Obviously, it got out of hand and became a riot. We don't disagree about that.
Well, this is not a little drink-em-up at Cranbrook High School. This was serious business down there in Virginia Beach.
I agree it was serious business, but that doesn't mean any more than Mr. Jackson's behavior, right or wrong, means that the police have the right to use brutality to quell it.
You don't
and I think what we saw in that videotape was wrong, even if it was egged on.
Your videotape did not even show you what the guy did. Why would a police officer in a dangerous district, an old car, get out and start walking around when the police were there?
Look, he was trying to goad him, but that doesn't make it right. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
We've been trying to goad you here, Michael.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. What you are watching is not Kuwait City, it's Los Angeles. And those men with the sticks are not Saddam Hussein's elite Republican Guard, they're the LA Police Department. Our guest, George Holliday, happened to have his camera nearby when this scene took place outside his apartment window early Sunday morning. The victim, Rodney King, is black. The cops pulled him over after a high-speed chase. The tape shows him being kicked repeatedly and hit more than 40 times with nightsticks while lying helpless on the pavement. But does the tape show everything? The officers involved say that King resisted arrest and charged them twice before he was subdued. Witnesses say King offered no resistance. One says that afterwards the officers, quote, were all laughing and chuckling like they had just had a party. Los Angeles is in an uproar. Police Chief Daryl Gates says this is an isolated incident.
I would hope the public would not, on the basis of this one tape, make up their minds about the Los Angeles Police Department. We don't train our officers to do this kind of thing, and lastly, we do not tolerate it.
But other Angelenos say that police brutality towards minorities is common. The difference this time is that it was caught on tape. Pat?
George Holliday, you are the man that caught that incident on tape, I guess, Sunday night. Can you tell us my understanding is the police say that he was doing 115 miles an hour, 110 miles an hour. He was stopped. He refused to get out of the car. When he got out of the car, he pulled down one of the police officers. And at that point, the several minutes of beating began. Can you contradict any of that?
No, not really. I was woken up. I was sleeping at the time. I was woken up by the sound, and when I looked out of my window, I saw the suspect leaning against his car. At that time, I decided to go and get the camera and film this, and in that meantime, I wasn't watching what was happening. And when I got out there with the camera, he was already being hit, so I don't know really what happened.
All right, well, one other witness I saw on another network said that she saw him drag an officer down, but let's move on from there. Being where you are, sitting there with your camera, can you appreciate, understand any motivation on the part of those cops going 115 miles an hour trying to chase this guy down, the adrenaline pumping, fearing they might run over somebody or he might hit somebody? Can you understand why they did what they did at all?
No, I don't understand it, why they did it or why it happened. I did call the police department on Monday to find out if they could give me an answer why it happened, and I didn't get any response, but I don't understand it still.
Mr. Holliday, while you were watching and while you were taping, was there any sign that Mr. King was offering any resistance at all, or even capable of offering resistance?
No, it didn't look like he was resisting while I was filming there, no.
Mr. Holliday, let me ask you this. I mean, from your vantage point, you're sitting there and all of a sudden you look out the window and here's this scene of what looks to you like real brutality going on for minutes at a time. Would you have felt differently than you feel now if you knew that guy had run over somebody?
Well, I don't feel either way for him. As I say, I don't know what he did and what led up to the point where he was being hit.
What are your feelings about what you saw?
I don't have any feelings yet.
Why did you rush for your camera to tape it?
Well, I had just bought the camera a couple of weeks ago, and you're trigger happy when you've got a new camera, and it's the first thing that occurred to me. When I first looked out of my window, there wasn't any action going on of any beating or anything like that. And I just wanted to get some footage on my camera, and by the time I got out...
All right, let me ask you then,
yes.
Mr. Holliday, what did you tell the police when you called them? What were the first things you told them about what you had seen and what you had taped?
There was no mention of a tape at that time. I just said, hi, I'm George Holliday. I'm a neighbor. I live in the area, and I saw what happened Sunday morning. I just wanted to find out if they could give me an explanation of what had happened.
And what did you say you had seen?
That I'd seen the police hitting this man right outside my apartment.
And you didn't understand why they had gone on hitting him for that period of time?
I don't remember if I mentioned that, but I just got a blunt answer. No, we don't give out any information, and that's it.
Okay, let's go down to San Francisco, where we've got Maury Hannigan, who's commissioner of the California Highway Patrol. Commissioner Hannigan, as I understand it, your men were involved in the chase, not involved in the beating, but they may have been watching it while it went on. Is that correct?
Well, Mike, this matter is under investigation by both the LAPD, the District Attorney's Office, as well as the CHP. Our unit was initially involved in the pursuit on the freeway and clocked the vehicle at in excess of 100 miles an hour, about 115 miles an hour. The individual went off onto the surface streets. The pursuit continued. And after a mile or two, they finally got him stopped and ordered him out of the vehicle. The PD was at the locale at that time and took over the arrest. And from what occurred from there, I think we have to find out based on the investigations that are going to are underway right now.
Sure,
I think
just a factual question. Were some of your men on the scene as well as men from the police department?
We had both a female and a male officer at the scene when this incident went down, yes.
Okay, you have said that this tape may not reflect what really happened. Tell us why not.
No, I don't think I said that. I said I'm disturbed from what I see on the tape. I'll quote at least Chief Gates, Daryl Gates, was quoted in the paper this morning. That was shocking, but I'm not ready to indict anybody until these investigations are completed and we have all the facts.
All right.
There were two other suspects in the vehicle, and those suspects were taken out of the vehicle on the right side and laid prone. So until we have all the facts as to the degree of what our officers saw, whether they tried to intercede or anything else, is something that we have to find out yet.
All right, now let's talk to Don Jackson. He's a former Hawthorne, California policeman who was arrested and roughed up 2 years ago in Long Beach, California. He secretly had it all videotaped. The videotape was played, I believe, on NBC. The jury selection began this week in the trial of the policeman who had roughed up Mr. Don Jackson. Don, thanks for coming back on Crossfire. What is your view of what you have seen and what it represents?
Well, first of all, I have to say that the only thing more outrageous than the actual incident are the explanations and excuses that have been offered to satiate the public's concern over this issue. Obviously, the police who beat this man had no reason to continue striking him as he was laying flat on the ground. As I saw it, they struck him just about on every part of his body. Now, to say that we need to hold the situation in abeyance until someone comes in and shows some additional evidence, I think is really unnecessary.
All right,
I think
let me cut you off, cut in there, Don. You're an ex-cop yourself. Here are these guys on the highway patrol and these other fellas who are dealing with criminals, felons all the time. They're going down a road at 115 miles an hour, 110, risking their own lives. And here's this guy, again, who's an ex-con, and they're chasing him, and they finally catch the guy. They're all pumped up with adrenaline. They have some trouble getting him out of the car. One officer's dragged on the ground, and they start hitting him. And there ain't any doubt about it, the ref should have stepped in and stopped this thing. But as a cop, can't you understand that, you know, how these guys are feeling after this chase is all over?
Yeah, I have a problem with two things that you said. Number one, first you said this man is a convict. I think that if he served his time, served his sentence, that issue is really irrelevant. Secondly, this man is entitled to due process. This was what this country is based upon, that you're entitled to a trial by a jury, that if there are penalties attached to your conduct, that penalty is to be issued out by a court of law, not by police officers on the street, irrespective of how pumped up they are.
All right, but let me mention something, Don. You know, there are cops that are injured in these high-speed chases. Some are killed. Cops are killed in shootouts with characters like this. And every time that happens, hold it, Don, every time that happens, they don't get this kind of publicity.
I'm going to have to interrupt you once again, because as with the last show, you misstate the facts. From 1931, LAPD was branded as one of the worst departments in this country. Now, maybe they're not the worst department, but they certainly have a pattern of violence which has been spoken to by numerous commission reports, hearings, legislative committees, and Civil Rights Commission hearings, which show a pattern of abuse by these officers that has nothing to do with criminal conduct or the fact that they're in high-speed pursuits. And in fact, Chief Gates himself has been sanctioned $275,000 for remarks he made in support of violence by his officers.
Okay, we got to get Commissioner Hannigan back in here. Commissioner, what about what Don was saying? Suppose it's true that this guy resisted arrest, every accusation that's been made against him. Does that justify what those cops were doing to him on the tape after he was already lying on the ground and they had complete control of him?
Well, I would say nothing justifies that conduct if there were no other facts that were mitigating. I agree 100% with that. And I also agree with Mr. Jackson when he says that an individual's entitled to due process. But I would also say that the officers involved in this matter are also entitled to due process. And let's get the facts, let's find out what occurred, and then take the appropriate action.
Well, give us an example of what facts there could be. Assume whatever you like in terms of the facts that would justify or mitigate what we saw on the tape.
Well, there apparently been some statements by witnesses the individual was resisting arrest, and that would certainly, to a certain degree, require some action by the officers. Whether it required the degree that we saw on this tape, and as Daryl Gates said, he was shocked. He was quoted as saying he was shocked when I saw this. I was shocked. I think any policeman would be.
So even if he had been, even if he had, I mean, I think you're right that we can't try these officers on Crossfire here, but
and I agree. And
even if this guy was resisting arrest, that doesn't justify what we saw on the tape.
I can't argue with that at all. But until we have all the facts, I'm not ready to say what officers were responsible for what action should have been taken or wasn't taken.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about the question, is there racial motivation here, and is there a racial problem with the LAPD? Welcome back. After a 100-mile-per-hour car chase through L.A. County Sunday, Rodney Glenn King, a black man and a felon on parole, was given a beating he won't soon forget by the cops who chased him down. We're discussing the incident, the context in which it occurred, and whether it has a larger meaning. Our guests, all of them out in California, are George Holliday first. He shot the videotape that's been seen around the country and the world of the L.A. County Police beating and kicking that suspect. Incidentally, we invited the L.A. County Police to come on, and they indicated they can't as long as this is under investigation. Maury Hannigan's another guest. He's commissioner of the California Highway Patrol, who had two officers who were on the scene but not involved in what was going on. And Don Jackson. He's a former Hawthorne, California cop who was arrested and roughed up 2 years ago in Long Beach, California, and he secretly had that beating videotaped. Don, I want to ask you this question. First, if you think there's a racial motivation here, the cops are white and the suspect or the individual driving the car was black. And secondly, if these kinds of beatings are racial, which are racial in character, are not partly the result of the hard fact that black males from about 16 to 35, even though they're about 2% of the population, commit something like 50% of the crimes, so that when these white cops are run into tough characters, more often than not, they're guys of the same age and color as this fellow who was driving that car.
Well, Pat, you continue to make the spurious relationship between crime increase and abuse by police officers. one of the staple features of the black experience in America has been police abuse. Before there were gangs, before there were the Crips and the Bloods, there was the Ku Klux Klan, and there were the police officers who were part of that organization who routinely violated our civil rights and beat us summarily for the race that we belonged to. Now, in terms of this...
Don, I got to interrupt you and ask you this. Now, you and I know if that had been a 75-year-old black woman driving that car, that wouldn't have happened. Because they don't have run-ins. Cops don't have run-ins with 75-year-old black women.
How about 55-year-old Betty Jean Aburn, who was shot 28 times by LA County Sheriff's deputies after she stole a candy bar from an ice cream store? How about Eula Love, who was shot some 18 times by LAPD officers?
Okay, Don, let me ask you this.
After throwing a kitchen knife. Why don't you tell me about that?
Those are good examples, but you tell me this. Give me the figures of how many black folks in the last year were shot to death and killed, and how many of those killings were done by cops, and how many of them were done by other blacks who weren't cops?
I can tell you this, that blacks account yearly for 50% of the mortalities involved in police shootings. Secondly, I can tell you that the LAPD has paid out close to $15 million in lawsuits to black and Latino families over the past few years for people that they have violated and abused. So it speaks to a pattern of conduct that is representative of a racial animus on the part of police officers that has really gone unchecked for several years. The Watts uprising spoke to it. There'll probably be other uprisings in the future if this matter isn't dealt with immediately.
Okay. Commissioner Hannigan, we're using you as what we call a surrogate around here in a way because Daryl Gates of the LA Police Department felt he couldn't come on until the investigation is finished, and we appreciate your agreeing to come on. But do you agree with Pat that if it's not okay, it's at least understandable that police give black men worse treatment than white men and older women because they're black and because statistics prove that they commit more crimes? Do you agree with that?
Well, I won't try to read Pat's mind for him, but...
you don't have to. He said it. I'm asking if you agree with it.
Say that.
Well, I think what he said is because of the high percentage, at least statistically, that blacks are involved in crimes, does it create this type of situations to exist. Now, I really can't speak to that, to be honest with you. We make some 6 million enforcement, or 4.3 million enforcement contacts a year in my own department, and in total, we may have about 1,600 complaints.
Well, but you used to be on the beat yourself, I assume.
Sure.
Did you find yourself more nervous, more energized, more...
Did you, Michael?
More... Well, I'm trying to phrase this carefully, Pat. It's a sensitive question, as you will surely understand. Did you find yourself reacting differently if you stopped someone and it turned out to be a young black male than if it turned out to be an old lady or a white male?
Well, I don't think it had anything to do with race. I think if you stopped any little old lady, you wouldn't be quite as apprehensive as you would a young man. And I personally do not think this is a racial situation. I think what you have here is I think Pat alluded to it earlier. You have a lot of adrenaline pumping at the end of pursuits, and sometimes officers lose control or don't use and follow the policies they should. And that's when an agency has to take action to correct that matter. I think
one of the things that
we'll see what happens in this investigation.
Sure. One of the things that upsets people about this episode is the number of cops who were standing around involved in this incident. Now, you had a couple of your people who were not actually involved in the beating, but they were standing there. Is it an obligation of a police officer, in your view, to stop other police if he or she sees them committing an abuse of this sort?
I would say yes. If an officer sees something going down that is grossly unjust, they should take some steps to do it. But I am not going to condemn anybody in this thing until all the facts are in and we can take a look at what occurred. Like I said, there were 2 other suspects in the car, and our officers were getting those people out and proning them out on the ground. What they saw, what actions they took to stop it, until we have all those facts, I don't even know if our officers did try to stop it or if they observed everything that occurred that's on the tape.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about whether this was an isolated incident that just happened to be on tape or whether it's quite common.
Which is that by and large, blacks and Latinos are disproportionately responsible for the crime and violence out there, and disproportionately they're involved in collisions with cops.
There's no more criminals on the streets of Los Angeles than there are on Wall Street. So I don't buy this argument
But the Wall Street guys,
let me finish. Let me say that The fact is, racism in law enforcement is a well-documented fact. So it's not as if this thing is happening in a vacuum. In the black community, it's well known how the LAPD conducts itself. Now, they've had, just as I said, several $1 million of lawsuits paid. The most recent one, $3 million, where 88 LAPD officers went out and just abused over 40 people. And this speaks...
We have less than a minute left. I want to get Commissioner Hannigan back in here a second. Mr. Holliday told us he didn't even know what he was going to film when he rushed to get his camera. It's sort of a remarkable coincidence, isn't it, that if this was just an isolated incident of police brutality against a black guy, that it happened to be the one that was filmed. Is it really just an isolated incident?
Well, there are 400,000 policemen plus in this country, making literally millions and millions of arrests. I think this is an isolated incident. And I have to say something. From what I've seen on the tape, there were 3 or 4 police officers that were involved in this thing. And I don't think that you should indict all of law enforcement, or certainly all of LAPD, for the conduct or the poor actions of just a few officers. I think that is wrong. LAPD has got one of the most renowned law enforcement agencies in the world. Do they have problems when they have an outfit with 8,500 people? Probably. But from what I've seen, LAPD handles their problems.
Okay, we're out of time. Commissioner Hannigan, thanks for coming down from Sacramento. Don Jackson, thank you for coming in. And thank you, George Holliday, the man who shot the film and made this entire show possible. Pat and I will be back in a moment.
.267 Broadway, New York, New York, 10007, or call 212-227-READ.
Michael, let me give you a question you gave Mr. Gates. Knowing that something like 98% of the crime in this city is the violent crime is the work...
Gates, Mr. Hannigan.
Mr. Hannigan, excuse me, of young male black 16 to 35. If you walked out of CNN and you saw a group of whites, kids about 19, 20 on one side, and a group of blacks over here, which would make you more nervous?
I might well be more nervous about the blacks. We all have racism in our hearts, and there is a statistical basis to it. But let me ask you a question. Does that excuse taking a guy out of his car, and however he got on the ground with his hands tied behind him, beating him to a pulp while he's completely hopeless?
Mike, I don't agree with that form of driver education. But listen, I mean, you're right.
So what's your point?
My point is that was very excessive what those guys did. They should have stopped. But my point is, the fact that you'd be more scared of those black fellows out there is not racism at all. It's simple common sense.
What doesn't matter what's in your heart, whether you're scared or not. The question is, do you think they ought to be treated differently because they're black?
I think you ought to be more nervous about them because of the statistics.
And act on your nervousness?
Yes.
All right. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. You've heard it. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.